Welcome back to the channel. This is the Action Figure Grader. It's near Halloween, and one of you in one of my recent CGC comic book market updates said, hey, I'd like to see some prices for pre-code horror CGC comics. And I thought because we're getting near Halloween that it made sense to put this together. Now, I'm going to caveat this video by saying that I do not know anything, zero, about pre-code comic books. I've seen the big ones, which we've got a few of them towards the end of the video. And the other big thing is the pre-code horror is so rare that it's really hard to find good data for it. But I did find some that caught my eye. And for me, it's really about the aesthetics of the cover. Obviously, there's some big books that we all know and love, like Crime Suspense Stories and Chamber of Chills, things like that. We've got a few of those data points, and I did pull up the Go Collect data for those as well. But just in general, the pre-code horror, and for those of you that don't know what that means, pre-code just means pre-comic code authority, and a lot of these books were kind of viewed as the second coming of Satan, and there was a lot of book burnings, and as a result, a lot of these books from the 50s and before, they just aren't around anymore, and so that's why they're very valuable. And to a certain extent, the pre-code horror books, in my opinion, it's almost like you're buying art, in the fact that the appeal for certain collectors, it goes beyond just being comic books. It's the whole idea of horror or crime or, bondage and robots and skeletons. I mean, there's just so many different cool, aesthetically interesting covers to the pre-code horror comics that I think it does have a wide appeal. And a lot of these, they've really held up very well in the current market environment, where a lot of comics have gone down in value from their peaks. And, these are kind of, a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of these are investment grade kind of books in higher grade. Now, what's on eBay, it's not always the highest grade, but I did want to at least show them to you and just give you a sense of the kind of style, the art style in a lot of these, because they are appealing. And I could understand why there are people out there that spend big money on these if you've got the big money, because I do think that there is a certain timelessness to these pre-code horror books that potentially they could hold their value even way down the line. And so I did want to put those together. So I put together a pretty cool thumbnail here using the Adobe AI kind of art stuff. I just thought that was a pretty cool looking cover. And if you guys want, October 31st, Halloween, happens to fall on a Friday, which is when I usually release my what to buy videos. And I'll try to do a Halloween themed what to buy video for next Friday if you guys are so inclined. So let me know in the comments. But let's just take a look at the types of books that are selling on eBay. And obviously, eBay is not going to attract the big high grade or the really rare stuff, but there are some pretty appealing looking covers. And this one is Space Action number 2 from 1952. And it's kind of like one of the, I'm not saying it's the earliest, but it's one of those reflections in the visor type of comics that we see a lot with Star Wars books, like Boba Fett's visor or Darth Vader's visor. Well, they were doing it in the 1950s as well. And this was a really striking cover that I liked. And it was a 4.5 cream to off-white. And, again, a lot of the grades, it almost doesn't matter for them, just given how tough a lot of these are to find. But this one sold at an auction for $320. But this one's got kind of a lot going on. You got the monster, you got the damsel in distress, and you've also got the sci-fi related themes. And, a lot of these pre-code Golden Age books, this is not really horror, but I just wanted to include this as part of the pre-code kind of summary of books that have sold recently that had striking covers. But it's just interesting to see the types of books that were popular. Chamber of Chills is obviously a big series from the 1950s that people know and have heard of, and their covers are probably some of the best. Tales of Terror and suspense. This one was Chamber of Chills number 18. And, again, you just have people, it's usually people that are doing mundane things, but they're left in like a vulnerable position. A lot of it's women and crime related to that. But in this case, you got a guy getting a shave, and, you've got the barber with his straight razor there. I mean, that's just a really cool cover that takes a fairly common occurrence from back then and imagines the worst thing possible. So this one was sold by Blizzard Comics, which I really like them. They always do a really good job. I bought from them in the past. It's sold for $422, but man, what a great looking cover that is. And, I'm not saying it's the cheapest thing in the world, but a lot of these books are pretty affordable given the age. And if you were to buy something like these, I'm not saying that they're investment grade books, but they are collector grade books. And you can put a really nice pre-code collection together in lower grade for I would call a pretty reasonable price. $422 to me, this is a book I'd pay $422 for all day long, just given how killer that cover is. I mean, and I might do that. You can see all these empty shelves behind me. And once we redo this room, I'm probably going to get some displays for a lot of my big time comics. I've still got, $80,000 to $90,000 of CGC graded comics. And I thought it'd be really cool to kind of display a lot of them. But this is the kind of book that I would get to display on these shelves once we figure out what we're going to do with this room. But I really like that one. Here's another one that, again, it kind of touches on pretty common themes for the pre-code horror stuff. The Grim Reaper, skeletons, and, women in bondage is a big one from the 1950s. This was from 1952, Witches' Tales, number 8. And, again, bondage was a pretty common thing that you saw. And you saw a lot of the bondage, too, with the pre-code sci-fi books, like the first one we saw. This one sold for $449.99, but I thought that was a great looking cover, really appealing art with the Grim Reaper there and the skeletons. And, Adventures into Weird Worlds, that's where you get a lot of these pretty wild looking futuristic and alien type things going on. And, here's one where the guy used his knife to cut off one of the tentacles of an octopus kind of cephalopod looking thing. And that one was a 5.5 from 1952 and sold for $450 as well. There were some others in here that I really like the covers or have seen the covers in the past. This is one I have seen many times in the past that is very popular. It was ungraded, but this is Weird Terror number 3, and kind of a quicksand type thing where the adventurer with all the bags of jewels, and out of the quicksand comes a gigantic, monster. So again, this is a cover I've seen many times, but the blood on the title of the cover, I mean, everything about this is just awesome. It's just a great looking cover. And that one sold for $475. Another ungraded book that I've seen in the past, The Dead Who Walk. This was a one-shot pre-code horror. It's always a very, the women always have very pointy breasts, and they're always kind of in a position where they're alone or in bondage and things like that. But this is another cover that's got, it's almost like I guess like a Van Gogh style art style to the monsters, to the zombies or mummies. And that one sold for big money, given it was ungraded at $619. Beyond number 1. This is, I don't know if I've seen this one in the past. I feel like I have. Just the werewolf looks familiar to me, so I feel like I might have seen it on Automatic Comics or one of those YouTube channels where they focus on pre-code horror stuff. This one sold for $700. This was a 2.5 from 1950. Here's another one that I'm aware of or I've seen many times, and that's The Beheading. This is Weird Tales of Terror, Horrific number 7 from 1953. So most of these are from the 1950s. $764 on that ungraded copy. So you can imagine how expensive that book would be. Here's another very well-known cover where the guy's buried alive and he's getting eaten by, the fire ants. Mr. Mystery number 11. This is a very, very well-known book. And this was a very low-grade example, but even in a 1.0 off-white to white pages, it still sold for almost $800. So you can imagine what that book would go for in higher grade. But that's a very, very well-known pre-code horror book. Eerie number 16. Again, another common theme. You have a woman who's doing something fairly common, innocuous or mundane, like being in a museum, looking through the flyers from the museum catalog, and out of the tomb comes the mummy. So it's just a very common theme there. So very similar, again, art style to the women in a lot of these covers. This is from 1954 and sold for $1,500. So big number on that one, but it was a 7.5 off white to white pages. Pretty high grade for a pre-code horror book. Here's another one that I vaguely remember as just a very unique art style that is maybe a little different than some of the art style from the 1950s. This is from 1941, and you can see the stark difference in the art style for this book versus all those 1950s books that we've just looked at. It's almost like a Art Deco type of thing going on with the robot design there. So The Robot God, a novelette by Ray Cummings. So this is a short stories from 1941, Weird Tales number 200, and it was an 8.0 off white to white pages. So maybe this one survived simply because it didn't really have a kind of a gruesome cover like some of these others that we've looked at. So maybe, there's more out there like this, or, it just could be less collectible just given the art style is just so much different than what we saw from those 1950s books. Obviously, one of the big ones from the pre-code horror, this is a classic and very, very pricey, and I've got some Go Collect data just to show you how expensive this book can get. But this is Chamber of Chills number 19 from 1953. This is a very well-known book. Obviously, the glass that is being served is like a radioactive or something like that. And Chamber of Chills number 19, it's just an incredible book. And even in a 3.0 with cream to off-white pages, this one sold for $59.80. And this one is for sale. It didn't sell, but I wanted to show it because it's such a high-grade copy. This is a pedigree example, 8.5 off-white to white pages that's listed on eBay for $60,500. So that is a very, very pricey book. And, this kind of shows you just how rare, and given the prices of those, you would think that anyone and everyone who had one of these would want to get it graded just because of the value. And even with the big dollar denominations for where this book goes for, even in low grade, this 3.0 sold for $59.80, almost $6,000. But there's only 147 copies total on the CGC census. So that just shows you that the book burning that happened around these horror comics was pretty effective. There is a 9.6 for this book that sold in 2021 for $102,000. I would wager that number would be significantly higher today. Even though 2021 was kind of the start of the run-up, or was right during the heart of the run-up of comic books during the COVID era, you can rest assured that number would be massive. A 9.4 for this book sold for $477 in 2005, so about 20 years ago. And that just shows you how much these books have appreciated over the last 20 years when somebody paid $477 for a 9.4 when it was the only one on the CGC census. And then, in 2021, one that was just one grade higher sold for $102,000. So very, very pricey. And I would wager that book would be very expensive on the secondary market today. But, even in a 1.8, the fair market value listing is $77.50, which, maybe that's a little high given that this one that sold, that was a 3.0, sold for $59.80. That these numbers are probably too high just given that data point. So, that's an example there that the prices have come down, but they're still very, very pricey. Crime Suspense Stories number 22, another pretty famous cover from the pre-code horror books. This is from 1954. It shows the beheaded victim with the axe there. I mean, this is one of the classic covers. This one was listed for $38.95 and sold for $3,600. And here's that sale right there of $3,600. But, you know, if you're looking at the price points, yes, they've come down, but it's a return to the media, you know, to the trend line, you could argue. You can see what the books have done from 2014 up to today. And, you know, we obviously had the COVID spike and prices have come down from there, but it's still on the upward trend overall. It's kind of like Batman 227, the Neil Adams cover that I really love. That book has really still, you know, it has come back down to the trend line, but the trend line is still going up from here. So there's always going to be those peaks and valleys, but the overall trend line is very good for this book and is probably pretty similar chart for a lot of these pre-code horror key books. So just an interesting sale there at $3,600. These, you know, and a lot of the times that the Go Collect fair market value data, it's not going to be correct just because there's so few sales on eBay especially. But there's very few of these books out there, and they just sell so infrequently. Here's another pretty famous one showing the hanging man from the noose. This is a 6.0 cream to off-white pages. And this is Crime Suspense Stories number 20 from 1953. And this one sold in an auction for $25.74. And you can see that this one was, again, a 6.0. And again, it's a very similar chart where it's returning to the median. But there's 321 copies of this versus maybe some of the others where there are fewer on the census. But this is a pretty well-known book. And in other grades, you can see what they've done. A 9.6 sold in 2022 for $31,000 and change. So in very high grade, they can go for huge, huge money. And again, you can see what they've done over the last 20 plus years. The 9.4, the last one that sold was a 9.4, but that was back in 2002 for $2,300 versus 2022 for one grade up. And you're talking, you know, 15 times that number. So it's a pretty incredible jump what these books have done over the last 20 years. Just a few others that I picked out that I wanted to show. Haunted Thrills number 6 sold in an auction for $21.26. And what's interesting was this book originally sold September 7th. It sold on August 17th for $21.26. I guess they didn't pay because it's Blizzard Comics. They're 100% trusted. I bought from them many times. But anyway, I guess they never paid. They probably filed a claim, and then they relisted it in September, and it closed in September 7th for quite a bit less. So it went from $21.26 to $18.08 for the same book after a non-payment, I assume. But just an interesting thing that happened there where it went for a little bit less, which it usually does when you relist a book like that. They figure something's wrong with it. But that's a really cool cover, though. It's kind of like gambling with your life when you got the roll of the dice. You got Satan back there, and you've got a skeleton with a top hat. I mean, a lot of these are just classic horror tropes. Another big one that I've always loved, just because it's just so striking, the cover. It's like a Ku Klux Klan-ish type of villain there. Again, a woman in bondage with a very similar aesthetic style to her face and body and things like that. And this is Shock Suspense Stories number 6, classic bondage cover. So this is a very much a classic. And, a lot of these books from the 50s do almost, I'm not saying it's Klan-like, but it portrays them as the villain, as they should. But it's just an incredible cover that, I don't know if I'd feel comfortable displaying this in my house, but I'd probably get yelled at by my wife. But I do think it's a really great looking cover there. So again, that one was from 1953, Shock Suspense Stories number 6, and sold for $2,000. And you can see here that this book actually has some high grade copies, 9.9. Is that right? 9.9? That can't be right. It's incredible that one of these actually exists in a 9.9. So there it is right there. And this one sold on Heritage Auctions. And this is back in 2015, and it sold for $15,535. I can only imagine what this book is worth today. That has got to be a very, very pricey book 10 years later. And, given what these have done over the last 10 years, that's incredible that one even exists at a 9.9. But two of them actually are on the census in a 9.9. So this is, again, is a book that is pretty easy to find in lower grade. And, it's still not going to be cheap. I mean, even in a 1.5, it still goes for $675, but which is a very doable number for most collectors, $500 to $600. But once you get up into the 1.8, 2.0, 2.5, it starts getting a little more pricey with $1,000 to $1,500 up to, a 4.0. So anyway, a lot of those just haven't sold recently just because they never come up for sale, but it's just another really cool cover. So anyway, I hope you found this information useful. I'm not much of a pre-code horror guy, but the market is there clearly, and there is demand for these books. And I just thought it was kind of fun to take a look at some of these books that maybe we haven't talked about in the past. That is all I've got for you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back soon.